Welcome back to my channel. This is GCSE poetry, seen and unseen poetry. We are looking at how to read poetry that we've never seen before, how to respond to it creatively and personally. And then when we've done all that, we're going to look at how to revise poems that we should know so that we get deeper into them for greater analysis and eventually comparative analysis. Today we're going to do two poems by Imtiaz Dharker, and she has perhaps the most abstract and confusing poem on the spec. And so today we got to think about what do we do when we're presented with abstraction and ambiguity, and we're going to use imagery to try and interpret the poem. So let's begin with a starter. Here you have 4 images of shoes. If you could press pause after I'm speaking just now and look at these images, and I've given you 2 starters sentences to help you going. What different stories do these shoes tell? How can objects and the way they are arranged tell different stories? And how do objects symbolize, represent, and narrate emotions in different ways? So if you could pause now and write 1 sentence for each of the images, that would be a good way to start. Okay, so I'll help now with what I would say. The one on the left looks to me like a very well-ordered house where there's, when you enter, you are to take off your footwear and enter using the footwear of the house. And that seems to me a very clean, sanitized, a very well-ordered house and culture. In the second image reminds me of growing up when we had a lot of friends coming around and all rushed in and taking off your shoes because you don't wear them at home and kicking them around, and you get this big mound of shoes. Here we have like mother, like son, they only wore 1 pair of shoes and they wore it all the time. You get an echo of the types of shoes, the converse it looks like to me, and a way of saying that the younger child is a mirror of the older adult. And the one on the right is going to be completely relevant to the first poem of hers that we look at, which is all the shoes outside of a temple or a mosque, left in a pile as if they themselves are going to the mosque. It almost seems like they're resting out there. They not only represent the people that wear them and their absence, they almost seem to be sentient or present themselves. That's how I would look at those images. I want you to think about another starter, and it might be relevant to now when we're all locked in our homes. If your house was on fire, what are 3 things you'd save? Forget about things that are useful like a phone. What is something useless that you'd save? And when you've written those down, I want you to answer these questions. What do these objects mean to you? What do these objects represent to you? What reminds you most of a happy or a sad time? What reminds you of someone you love? What would be worthless to someone else, but worth the whole world to you, and why? If you could pause the video right now and make sure that you respond as truthfully and honestly as you can, because what I want you to do is think about objects that have meaning for you. And once you can do that, you can start to interpret things much easier, because it isn't confusing then to think, my youngest is attached to a piece of cloth that is worn down and it is a tiger. It is in the shape of a tiger, and she is so attached to it that it's her greatest love. And once you get that inanimate objects can have that meaning for an individual, then you can start to see what they do in poems. Okay, so if you pause right now. Okay, so you've looked at some images, you've thought about what objects can represent. Now we're going to look at Imtiaz Dharker's poetry, and I want you to think about 2 terms, and you might want to write them down. Abstraction first, non-representational art, we're going to look at, and ambiguity, where the meaning is where the writer makes the meaning deliberately unclear or hidden. And this is a move that poets particularly make to offer the reader the possibility for multiple interpretations and readings. And those access points are more they're facilitated by ambiguity. But ambiguity, the strangeness, also can really affect a reader and really turn them off and make them upset because they fall into this trap that the poem is a riddle or the poem has a definite meaning, where we're going to remind ourselves that poetry is much more about a process of reading and rereading and annotating and responding and trying to understand what's going on and to figure out what the poem means for ourselves. And we're going to practice that as we do in every lesson. So if you didn't know, it's worth knowing that Arabic is a highly visual language. Its calligraphy and its abstract representations evoke emotion. And in Islam, there is a prohibition, though it's a little bit more complicated than that, but let's say there's a prohibition, as there is in Judaism, towards pictorial representation. So the actual writing of Arabic takes on symbolic meaning, as do patterns. So I just want you, just as an imaginative exercise, to look at these images and imagine you could speak the language depicted here. And even I want you to think about the one on the right, the tile. It has a secret language. What do you think these objects are saying? What do you think their secret message might mean? So I think this is, I'm inviting you already into abstract thought, but for me, the one on the left with its big sweeping high motions makes me think of something quite royal or something quite important, something that's gone over a long period of time, perhaps something holy because of its distance between the top and the bottom. The one on the right seems so intricate and elaborate. It seems to me something fragile and solid at the same time. It makes me think of power. It makes me think of light. I could think of the shadow if that would be cast through this. I can think of the beauty of God, perhaps. I think the one on the right is something that's talking to me about the unity of things and how flowers and shapes and sounds and colors and the sky and water are all in part of the same thing. That's how those images speak to me. Here's another image, and I'd like you to pause and just answer, or if you're with someone, you could speak to them. What are the colors and the designs supposed to make you think and feel here? Who made this and for whom? And how long do you think it took to make? Okay, hopefully you've taken some predictions. You should write things down. You should interact. You can't just know the answers. You're not going to learn as much. This is a Quran, and it's an exquisite one. And by the way, if you want to see more images of Qurans, you should go to the British Library's website and look at some of their masterworks. So that's where I took these from. This is one from India in the 16th century. These pages are known as carpet pages due to rich, ornate, abstract patterns whose mix of detail and large-scale effect is similar to that seen on high-quality carpets. It might be worth thinking, I don't speak Arabic, but I can see that this writer isn't simply trying to convey something in words, but there's a visual effect that they're going for too. And I think it's richly elaborate visual field is supposed to impress me that there's a pattern and there's work being done here and there's something of real importance and care. And I wonder how we could relate that to the actual fact that it's a religious book. This is not a Quran, even though there's Arabic. What do you think, what do you think this cover's for? And how do the colors and patterns make you feel? Do they make you feel anything? I mean, for some people, colors and aesthetics can immediately give them feelings of pleasure or annoyance. Some people are completely indifferent. Whereas, where are you in that scale? Okay, I'm going to tell you what this is. So this is another Islamic style carpet page, but this is actually for the four Gospels. This is for a Christian text in Arabic from Palestine in 1337. It is an Islamic style carpet page from the Gospel of St. Luke. This page is known as a carpet page due to rich, ornate, abstract patterns whose mix of detail and large-scale effect is similar to that seen in high-quality carpets. Again, you get this abstract visual field that's supposed to give some feeling of, well, I don't know, a religious feeling, one of peace, one of worship. It's worth thinking about what is the What is the painter trying to make you feel, now that you know it's for a Christian religious text? What does it make you feel, if anything? Maybe it doesn't make you feel anything, but I think it's quite beautiful. Here's another one from the British Library. What is the story of the image to the left? What culture is it from? Who made it and for whom? Do people read this like we might read a comic book or a painting? Imagine it was a gift. What did someone feel when they opened it? Okay, this is a really strange and magical document for me, because what I see are East Asian faces. I see magical beings, angels, it seems. I see a magical half-beast, half-person in the middle being carried by someone whose face is missing, who's surrounded by seemingly a magical golden flame, and they're above the clouds and in the stars, and there's Arabic written. So what is this? Well, this is the ascent of the Prophet Muhammad. This miniature shows the ascent of the Prophet Muhammad to heaven on his horse Buraq, guided by the Archangel Gabriel with an escort of angels. It is from Nizami Kamza and was created in Tabriz in Iran by the calligrapher Shah Mahmud Nishapuri for Shah Tamsmasp. According to tradition, the face of the Prophet Muhammad has been whitened out. I think this is an amazing document because it's so visually striking, and it helps me think about how enormous the imprint of Islam has been on world culture, and how it's been the interaction of cultures, and how this notion of even the pictorial prohibition against painting and drawing isn't always 100% and always for all time. And here's an example of a pictorial representation of the Prophet. But then, of course, his face has been whitened out as per tradition. This is just an amazing document, I think, to look at, to think about what is it supposed to signify as a story from the Prophet's life. What am I supposed to feel? I'm in awe of this image. I'm in awe of the colors. I'm in awe of the story. I think it's absolutely magical and intense and powerful. And as an image, it really projects something to me. Here's another one. How do different cultures merge their visual cultures? Can something visual mean something without you knowing it? Colors, shapes, and design can deliver meaning. What meaning is this image giving you? So for me, this image contrasts to the one we just looked at because it's very pared down, and the pattern is very simple, and the words in the middle seem to be really crucial and important. So I'm wondering, where's this from? This is a Quran from China. A Quran text displayed within a decorative lantern motif, demonstrating how Islamic styles of calligraphy and illumination, that is, writing on a text, were combined with local styles, symbols, and aesthetics from local cultures. Amazingly, again, Islam's imprint over a huge geographic area and a huge amount of time, and how each culture kind of adapted to the demands of the Islamic tradition, and of course Arabic being the central aspect of it, because no matter what culture or language, the Arabic or the Quran itself is sacred. So it's really interesting for me to see those melding of traditions. Okay, so all of this is a way of getting you to think about, how do we read the visual field? These are all abstract images as far as I'm concerned, and they're ambiguous in the sense like I don't know absolutely what they mean. I get senses, and I'm not frightened of responding and thinking and looking at them, and I'm open to having feelings and emotions about what I'm looking at. This is a way, for me, I'm trying to model to you what you need to do when you're approaching a poem. You need to stop being intimidated, frightened, or indifferent. You need to look at a lot of objects, and a lot of art is a wonderful way of preparing yourself for reading poetry. To not be frightened, to be open to looking at and continually looking at and asking yourself questions about what you're looking at. And to accept the fact that some things are going to be abstract, some things are going to be ambiguous, but that they can still be beautiful and have personal meaning to you. Okay, now let's look at some poems by Imtiaz Dharker. We're going to begin by looking at a poem first called Prayer, and it's on page 49 of the Langdon Park School booklet. Again, I'd invite you to look at the image on the right. That's the one I want you to think about when you're looking at this poem. And when you're doing the language analysis, I want you to think about pulling out images that strike you, that link to this. I'm going to help you a little bit, just structurally, to tell you that this is a poem about a simple moment. It's nothing complex outside of mosque. The speaker is looking at some shoes and starts thinking of them as their own, as the shoes themselves, as their own praying believers. The shoes take on the same abstract meaning as gold lettering in a holy book. Okay, so they kind of add beauty to the activity that's going on in the main size. So again, I might invite you to look back at the lettering on the outside of the pages and think about how does that help support what's on the middle. And everything is a form of prayer to God, the speaker comes to understand. Now, I'm giving you a lot of heads up because this isn't the easiest of poems, and she isn't the easiest of writers, but actually I think she's quite a beautiful writer, and I think she's worth your time. Okay, so here we go. We're looking at the poem Prayer. This place is full of worshippers. You can tell by the sandals piled outside, the owner's prints worn into leather, rubber, plastic, a picture clearer than the faces put together, with some originality, brows and eyes, the slant of cheek to chin. So we get a personification of sandals and their personality and the imprint that becomes a kind of face. They take on a personality and life. What prayer are they whispering? Each one has left a mark, the perfect pattern of a need. Sole and heel and toe in dark curved patches, heels worn down, thongs ragged, mended many times. So the words that strike me are need. What is the need? What is need? And what are they whispering? What kind of prayer are they whispering? Well, the mark is a need, and the need is of the foot. The foot creates a pattern. And she's saying that pattern's a kind of need. It needs space, maybe. Needs a place. Then we get some other language. The heels worn down. Tired, ragged, tired, weary, mended, fixed. So the foot is harmed or hurt, and the sandal acts as a form of protection, and it cares for, in a way, the foot. So many shuffling hopes, pounded into print. What amazing phrases. As clear as the pages of holy books, illuminated with the glint of gold around the lettering. Wow. Shuffling hopes. What a hilarious phrase for these sandals. They're hopeful. They are like... the metaphor here is suggesting that they're like... it's a metaphor. That they are themselves the imprints of life and prayer. And for the poet, and now for us, because we're borrowing her sight, they're as clear as holy books. And they're the gold lettering. They're that glint, that glint of gold lettering around the letters to really help us see what is so important. The people that they inhabit. Oh, I never noticed that. Okay, so that maybe that's what the sandals themselves help us see what's inside, just like the gold lettering helps us see the letters. What are they whispering? love this idea, this repetition, that they themselves are praying and whispering. Outside in the sun, such a quiet crowd of shoes, thrown together like 1,000 prayers washing against the walls of God. Oh my goodness, what? So all those sandals are like a quiet crowd, almost not silent, but quiet, all together. And the sandals themselves are themselves compared to thousands of prayers washing against a wall, the walls of God. Innocently, that's a wonder. I don't really know what to make of this. It's so abstract. The prayers are like water washing against God's wall, just gently touching it. So it's a kind of it's a very gentle, beautiful form of worship. Because everything can be a form of worship with God. Just like any object, if you have that religious belief, can have meaning. And now we see just these shoes just washing up. What I'd like you to do is try and read the poem again for yourself. Don't be obsessed with trying to figure out what it's about. Just try and find language that means something to you. I've tried to give you a foot up with the structure, and I've tried to read it with you. So now, if what you could do is just pause this video now, and like we've been doing, respond. Now, this is a complex poem. This is not something you're going to get right away, but hopefully you're starting to understand that your personal response, your own ideas, and your response to the evidence from the poem is really what it means to engage in poetry and to not dismiss it or not care. So if you pause now, take about 5 to 7 minutes and just, I feel, this poem reminds me of, I'm confused by, anything you'd like. Okay, so now we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the poem that is stated outright in the anthology Tissue. Tissue is a really tricky poem, and I'm going to try and read it raw for you here. I'm just going to give you a few hints. The title of the poem Tissue is a play on the idea of tissue paper, and that tissue also means skin. Many of the poems on the course, this title has this double meaning. Once again, we get abstraction and ambiguity. We get this image of the paper as if the paper itself is alive, and the paper keeps faith and records our life. And then there's this conclusion that if we could realize that skin and paper are closer than we thought, we might have less conflict. It's a very abstract idea. So in here is the structure of the poem. The paper is a record, our own history, speculation that if buildings were paper, they'd be more responsive to us. Then different types of paper, maps, receipts, all records of our lives. And then again, this big conclusion. Okay, so let me try and read this poem with you. So we're on page 50. The poem is called Tissue. At the end, I will put a link to my own analysis and reading of it. I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit tighter. Okay, so we're now in these more modern abstract poems that present us with some trickiness. Let's see what we can do. So, paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching. How can it change? How can it touch? The kind you find in well-used books. So well-used is from touching. The back of the Koran, where a hand has written in the names and histories. Who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died, where and how, on which sepia date, pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. So what we see is a book, even a holy book, it means more. Paper records our lives. our identity. It's touched, and in being touched, it's almost like a person, something living. Okay? Now, what we notice is the full stop there, and there's definitely a kind of notion of a break. So let's see. If speculative modalities, she's imagining, if buildings were paper, I might feel their drift, see how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Maps, too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. Fine slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold and what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. Okay, so if buildings were paper, maps and slips from grocery stores. So if buildings were paper, they might be more responsive. They might shift with a sigh. Maps, they are paper, and when the sun goes through them, it shows that all these things are maybe artificial. I don't know if that's what is being said here. The sun shines through their borderline. That we can that maybe they themselves, maps, are changeable, or they record something in some way. And then the grocery shops, they are a record of our life. And they fly our lives like paper kites. That's really abstract. Instead of being a record, the record might actually control us, but in a gentle way. Do they record or do they control? Oh gosh, what a abstract set of ideas. An architect could use all this, place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make, find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue, raise a structure never meant to last, of paper smoothed and stroked and thinned to be transparent, turned into your skin. Okay, wow. Let's go back. So here we got a record of our lives. That's another break. And now here we are. An architect. Okay, so if I was building, I could use this idea of paper, perhaps. And then it would be lit writing, lit and alive writing, and I would use that instead of brick because it could allow daylight, it could trace a bigger design, so it would like light, touch, it would be alive. So if we could build too with paper instead of building, this ability to change would then make something more temporary because it's never meant to last. And it would be alive because, again, smooth, stroked. Oh, I want to see. Smoothed, stroked, thinned is the one that... Oh, thinned here. The thinning for me is the most important because it's a way of recording time and change. The paper used so much that it becomes thinned under the touch. And so then all this paper would be turned almost into something transformed into life. So instead of something fixed, we might get something more alive. Oh gosh, it's so abstract. It's so, I'm not going to say unclear. I used to say unclear, but it's not. It's very specific. It's very concrete, as a matter of fact, but it is abstract and it is ambiguous. And you're going to need to leave yourself open if you're going to make your way through this poem. If you need help, of course, at the end of this video, you're going to see a link to my longer video on tissue. And of course, the internet is flooded with details. But the best way, of course, is for you to respond yourself to this poem. So if you could take a moment and think about what are the key lines and the key ideas for you, if you could extract those and plan that out. And then if you could press pause and take about 5 to 7 minutes and have your own response to the poem. Ideas, evidence, imagery is what we're really looking at. That idea of abstraction and ambiguity. If it helps, again, really think about Dharker as someone who's steeped in the Islamic tradition of visual texts, of abstraction and ambiguity, of the sacredness of objects, language, and the visual sphere, as well as the auditory sphere, and to really think about how sacred these things could be read. So you might want to look at some of those images again. Okay, so press pause, take 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, so today what we've done is we have read a few poems by Imtiaz Dharker. We've looked at the notions of abstraction and ambiguity. Hopefully now you're a confident enough reader that you can conquer the fear of not absolutely understanding what a poem is, and that you can read the poem on your own, then read it with me. I want you to think about now, as a stretch, how does Dharker use abstract feeling to convey emotions and feeling? Might you, and she has plenty of her poems on the internet, might you want to just go and look at some others? If you're interested, if you are Muslim, you might be interested in looking at other Islamic poetry. You might want to start reading the Quran. Of course, the Quran is not in prose. It is written in verse, and it is worth thinking about. All the skills that we're applying are going to help you when you try to make sense and experience that holy text. I want you to think about how can we read texts that are confusing and don't seem to make sense at first. And that's really where I want you to be at. Now, of course, you should go and at the end of this, if you want to do more work on the poem, go follow my video. All right, so that is Imtiaz Dharker. And I hope what you're starting to think about is your means of reading a poem, your comfort with ambiguity and abstraction, and the idea of using images. If you can identify imagery, things to the eye that you can use to interpret what's going on, you will start to become a very strong reader of poetry. I hope you're all doing really well, and I hope to talk to you soon.